Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. Thank you for joining us on Facebook Live for the launch of Clean and Green Singapore 2020. Today, we will be having an Ask Us Anything Q&A session on environmental sustainability. This is with Team MSE. MSE stands for Ministry of Sustainability and the Environment. Right here with us, we have Minister Grace Fu, Senior Minister of State Dr. Amy Khor, and Minister of State Desmond Tan. We are also joined by many of our environmental champions from schools, youth groups, non-government organizations, and corporations. Mr. Prakash Nair will be facilitating today's session. For those of our friends tuning in, please feel free to send in your questions on environmental sustainability through the comment section on CJS Facebook Live. Without further ado, let's begin the Q&A session. Over to you, Prakash.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. Good morning, ministers, and welcome to all of our guests here today. It's an early morning on a Saturday. It was nice, cool weather. So I do thank you for taking the effort of even getting out of bed. It was difficult for me. I'm sure it was difficult for you. So let's try to make this session as fruitful as possible. We're all here. Thank you very much. I also want to welcome all of you who are joining us from wherever you are, from your homes on Facebook Live. Welcome again. Environment sustainability has become an important part of our national agenda. Climate change defense is a vital component of our national conversation, primarily because we are also an island nation, and we are faced with have to deal with challenges like the rising sea levels, like more extreme weather, threats to the world's sources of food, drink, and energy sources. In connection with this, as a responsible member of the international community, how we manage our island's carbon footprint has come to the forefront of national consciousness, especially amongst our youth. Indeed, just as our pioneer and Merdeka generations in the past have had to face with social, economic, security challenges, environmental sustainability is certain to be one of the challenges that our present generation of Singaporeans will have to face in the future. To discuss this topic with our ministers today, we have with us some key partners, representatives from schools, from youth organizations, from non-government organizations, as well as corporations. So I want to welcome all of you again here today. For those of you who are joining us from home, please do put in your questions or comments on the Facebook comments page or comments section. We will try to get to as many questions as you can. Given the limited time, we may not be able to answer everything, but rest assured, put up your questions on the comment sections, and so that we get a sense of what you feel about this issue as well. So now let's officially open the floor for questions, starting with our partners right here. Would any of you would like to ask a question? If you do, raise your hand. I will come to you. And a mic will come to you. Don't worry, the mic has been cleaned and will be cleaned in between, right? We all have safety measures that we have to follow. And just introduce yourself, where you're from, and then ask your question as clearly as possible. I know we all have masks, so we do need to speak as clearly as we can, right? So can I invite anybody who would like to ask questions? Yes, can I get the lady? Yes, since she was the first one to put up. Thank you very much. It's always difficult to be the first one. So thank you very much.
Right. Good morning, ministers, and also the partners here. I'm Eleanor Quack from Ito School. I have a question. How could schools further support the nation's initiatives towards zero waste and becoming an eco-nation?
Thank you, Eleanor.
Maybe can I
Sure,
start?
MOS, go ahead.
Sorry, Eleanor, is it? Hi. Oh, thank you for the question. Maybe I'll start off first. Thank you all for coming. I think that when we talk about schools, we are essentially also talking about our youths, right? Most of our youths are in school at the moment. I think, first of all, the schools and MOE is a very key partner to sustainability effort from our ministry point of view and also from the nation's point of view. And all these years, we have been working very closely with MOE and the schools. Essentially, I look at it, the schools play a very key role in in a few areas. The first is, of course, to raise the level of awareness. We know that if you want something to be taught in our society, the schools plays a key part because our children grew up in the school system, and we thank the MOE and the school for partnering us so far in putting many of the learning resources into the online portals for our students to learn and also experience what sustainability, what waste, zero waste is all about, and many of the things that we are trying to inculcate in our children. So the second part, I think, beyond just raising the awareness, I think it's about advocacy. How can we bring our youth, and probably at a slightly older age, where they formulate their own ideas and their opinions about how sustainability should be promoted in Singapore. That's why we will encourage them to come to the dialogues, come to sessions like Citizens Work Group. We encourage, in fact, we have been working with MCCY, we work with many of the NGOs to also champion many of these conversations, which are important, right? So I think from awareness to advocacy, and lastly, I think the schools can work with us very closely in bringing action to our youth in schools, right? So this is where I think every year NEA works with the MOE and schools to have the Youth for the Environment or Environment for Youth Day. I think it's Youth for the Environment Day, right? And there is also an environment fund for schools where they can tap on, and every year we encourage our youth in the schools to step up, not just to be aware, to advocate, but also to take actions, whether it's in school projects, in the community projects, to bring these projects back to home. I think in these are the three areas we see that we can continue to work with MOE and the schools, and if you have further ideas, we'll be happy to support you as well.
Thank you, MS. Yeah, so, I'm reminded of the song, right? The children, I believe our children are our future. I won't start singing, trust me. We don't want that to happen. But really, right, the children are the starting point. And if you can get them on board, they can then influence their families, their communities, and so on. So let's start with as much that we can with our youth. Any other questions from people here? You had a question. Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and good morning, ministers. My name is Monica, and I'm from DBS Bank. My question is more on public-private partnerships. Could you share your thoughts on what role public-private partnerships could play in creating behavior change on some of the key sustainability issues, like food waste, for example, in Singapore? Thank you.
SMS, please.
Right, thank you. Well, actually, for us, everything really needs 3P partnership. So this is something that we promote through NEA, through PUB, through the ministry. 3P partnership means public-private, right? Yeah. And of course, what it also means is that we need to collaborate together, the people sector included. And in fact, many of our programs, we have a 3P partnership fund for the different entities, the government, the private sector, and the people sector, to work together to promote environmental sustainability in all aspects. So food waste is very interesting. In fact, for food waste, we have, for instance, in the community, we have this Tampines Green Lace project, which really is actually 3P partnership because we need to get the government support, right, to initiate this together with the community, and then we need the private sector really in terms of the expertise, the technologies. So food waste treatment, first segregation, and then food waste treatment. And for this, they actually bring it to OTH, which is really a private initiative too, to organize this food waste treatment program. And there are actually many other 3P programs that we have. We continue to want to engage and promote 3P partnership. Recently, Minister just launched a SG Eco Fund, which is actually open to everybody, whether it's social enterprise, NGOs, private sector, people sector, to drive any environmental sustainability projects. Yeah.
Thank you, SMS. Yes. Maybe let's start with the gentleman, then we'll come to you.
Hi, my name is Danny Lim. I'm from Sustainable Living Lab. I think the movement that is more close to our hearts is Repair Kopitiam. So I think, Repair Kopitiam. So I think we have been spreading the word, and we are actually now in more locations, just that we have been stopped by COVID. But I think I go straight to the point. I think somewhere during the COVID period, when we couldn't serve the public, that it occurred to me that there's a lot of people who need our help. In fact, that was the time that we realized that we can actually do more, especially in green recovery. So that means we are trying to get them back on track, but not just going back on track, but going back to doing things the sustainable way, so that we have a more future-proof Singapore. So I'm just wondering what kind of support do you require from us? Because we have very diverse kind of population that is with us, from the young ITE students all the way to the elderly. So we would like to do more, and in fact, I think by our expansion, we can affect more lives, and we can change, help to change the way people treat and build the prudency that used to be the prudence that used to be with us previously. Yeah, thanks.
So how can we tap on your expertise? Is that
Thank you. May I take this
yes,
question?
sure, Minister.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. And it's almost a year since COVID has affected our lives. So I think at this point, I just want to say a big thank you to everybody, all Singaporeans, for really being so cooperative, adhering to most of the safe distancing measures, and help us manage the caseloads. And today, we are in a very good position of very, very few caseloads. Most importantly, our hospitals are not inundated. We have very few cases in the ICU. So thanks to everybody who has cooperated. And of course, I think it has really affected our lives. It's a dramatic disruption to our lives. And I think Danny has rightly put forth that there were many people out there that require our help, whether it's in sustainability, whether it's in social services. There are two folds. One, actually people who are there, who are needing the help, find that there are actually additional needs required. In the past, when I can go out to the markets, I can go out to visit the senior activity centers, I could access some of the help, but because of circuit breaker, that's no longer available. So that's one group. The other group is the service provider themselves. They were, doing the way of reaching out to the community, going out, accessing the blocks, visiting the households. They couldn't do that during circuit breaker. So you're very rightly, thinking about what should this organization of services be post-COVID? Can we be more resilient so that if we come across another pandemic, hopefully not, but if there is one again, how would we organize ourselves better so that we have greater resilience? So the government has talked about digitalization, putting on clouds, and so on and so forth, so that we can continue with this connection with people. We can continue to provide most of the social services or even sustainability services, even with some of these safe distancing, safe management measures in place. I think that's something that all of us, government, corporates, NGOs, VWO, SSAs, all have to think about. How do we operate in the new normal? Definitely, sustainability itself actually is now becoming a tool for green recovery itself. It is an area that has a lot of exciting things that's going on. First, I think new technology is coming forth. Technology in terms of low carbon energy, in terms of higher energy efficiency products, in terms of plastics recycling, for example. Many, many areas, a lot of attention, a lot of minds, the best scientific minds, engineering minds are put in these areas because these are fairly global common problems across the world. Whether you are developing countries, you are developed countries, you face similar problems, similar challenges, and I think we are attracting attention, we are attracting resources in terms of capital, we are attracting the time and attention of, as I say, really brilliant people that's looking at it. So I think as a government, we should really look at how to avail ourselves in a few ways. First, policy. This is an area, because technology is changing, I think our policy side has to be responsive. We need to create space. We need to see how we should facilitate the adoption of certain technologies. It's easier said than done, but very often it's a very fine balance. If you change the policy too early, you find that the technologies have not found the products yet that is at a commercially doable level. Some of the technologies are still very expensive. So how do we do it? How do we find the time when it's just right and it has the economies of scale to drive down the product so that we can all benefit from sustainable solution, commercially sustainable solution. We can also make resources, grants, incentives, funds, so that to catalyze, to encourage some of these technologies to be tested. This is where the second P of the 3P comes in. Corporates, research, NGOs who are keen, who have that technology, will have to say, hey, I'm prepared to try this. I'm prepared to go to one constituency and say, let me try it out with you. And SMS Amy actually has done a lot of that. Citizens Work Group, cultivating several, I would say 8 to 10 each topic at least, for them to try out solutions on the ground. And that's the best way for us to know whether we have reached that tipping point, as we said, whether the technology actually could work in practice. The third part, which is really the third P of people, is this last mile again. How do we have people participating in some of these trials, participating in a way that can shape social norm? I think, again, some of you who are heading this, important advocacy group or NGO group, causes group, these are important partners of ours. Because the government cannot dictate what we do on a day-to-day basis. Whether you want to clean up the beach or not, that's not something that we can dictate. But you can see how, if you galvanize people of like-minded interests, you can do wonders, you can do a lot, you can actually have a lot of impact. And I think the government will be a lot more effective. Singapore will be a lot more effective on the sustainability agenda if we are able to harness all the 3Ps together. Government really looking at investing in R&D, investing in giving the right amount of financial incentives, at the same time supporting with policies, possibly changing some of the old policies, possibly creating some sandbox to allow new technologies to be in place. The companies, the organizations, the 2Ps can actually put forth some of these technologies to try out in the market. In the process, probably investing as well, investing in R&D, taking some of the commercial risks along. And the third one, really the third P is organizations, people that are out there really shaping and changing social norm so that we can bring along the larger population along with us.
Thank you, Minister. So essentially we all have a part to play, and that's why, we have invited our partners here as well. So maybe we can get one more question from here. I'm noticing some questions on Facebook Live as well. So yes, you have had your hand up. So if you can get a mic to her, please. Thank you.
Good morning, ministers and Green partners. Thank you for the team at NEA for inviting us. My name is Roxanne, and I'm CEO and co-founder of Bearpack, Singapore's homeborn reusable container ecosystem for restaurants to offer reusables for takeaway and now even food delivery. You mentioned that there are many grants available, and I'm really happy to see that there's actually an increase in green grants. They are like the 3P Partnership Fund, the 3R Fund, Call for Ideas Fund, even the Closing the Waste Loop initiatives. But the entry requirements for non-Singaporeans are actually really hard to meet, and our companies are still focused towards improving the green side of Singapore and making this a better place for everyone. So I would just like to know whether there's hope for making these funds more accessible to non-Singaporean citizens who genuinely want to make a difference. Thank you.
So the question on grants, the grants that are being available now, whether they can be opened up to non-Singaporeans, as well as perhaps maybe making it easier to apply. Minister?
I think this is a good proposal. We will definitely review. We will always be reviewing our grants, and I will take in that suggestion. I think we are all in it together, whether you're local, you're foreigner. But if I think the objective is a common one, I'm sure we will give it serious consideration. Thank you for your suggestion.
Just add that really for many of these funds, if you are actually working together through an organization, for instance, and it's not a particular individual, then it shouldn't be a problem. Yeah. So some of these, like whether it's Repair Kopitiam, Zero Waste SG, many of these NGOs, they comprise both locals as well as foreigners. But that entity, which is here, even WWF, right? They are actually from overseas, but they are here, and then they can submit applications for the grants. Yeah.
Okay, so let me get to one or two questions from Facebook Live. And I've been looking at quite a number of, few questions about plastic bags, the use of plastic bags or biodegradable bags. There was a question about something that was done in South Korea about providing biodegradable bags for every household in Singapore. That may be a start to us being less dependent on the plastic bags that we get at supermarkets and so on. Is that something that would be considered as a possible solution or possible measure that the government may take in the near future?
Sorry, I couldn't get it. Was it biodegradable bags?
Biodegradable bags.
Yeah.
So something like has been done in South Korea, according to the person.
Yeah, indeed. I think many countries are applying their minds on plastics, particularly on single-use plastics. And I think different countries have very different solutions, some similar solutions, but that makes it very rich for us, for Singapore, to pick up and to learn from other countries and other practices. We have to find solutions that meet the context and the needs of Singapore. And I think on the case of plastics, I would always go and ask what is the problem that we are trying to solve. It is a problem, it is a serious problem, but what is it to Singapore? I think in many places, the disposal of plastic is a serious problem because plastics are not disposed properly. You find them in the riverine system, you find them in the waterways, very often you find them in the ocean, and with marine litter, microplastics, you find them in the wildlife in the ocean. And that's not something that we like to see. I mean, the human being is polluting our environment. Very often, in some cases, the disposal means putting them in landfill, which means that they will stay with us for hundreds of years because they are not biodegradable. And again, that's a serious contamination of our environment. So in Singapore, on the disposal side, we are incinerating 100% of our waste. So we would not have the issue of it leaching into the marine life, so on and so forth. We don't have a problem with it's being stuck on Earth as well for hundreds of years because we incinerate. We harvest the energy out of it because our incinerators are waste to energy. We convert that to energy. But we do have a carbon issue with plastics. So I think that's what we need to solve. So the second question, or second and third issues with plastics, first one is disposal, how we dispose. Second is really how we make it. And how we make it actually has a range of carbon intensity. We can make it well, we can make it badly, and use up a lot more carbon in the process. And I think that's an area that we are very interested to look for improvement. We want our chemical industry, our oil industry to reduce their carbon footprint, to improve on the process. The third issue is how do we use it? And there again, I think we have some dilemma. We use plastics as a way to bag our garbage. If you go to places like Korea or Hong Kong or, Taiwan or Europe, where they have basically, they have certain regulations to prohibit the use of single-use plastics in the shops. They will still use plastics for their garbage disposal. It's just that it is specially made, specially priced in some cases, sometimes euro 15 or 16 per piece. This is their way to control the amount of waste being thrown. So what I'm trying to say is that the solution is an integrated one. We have to look at it in a whole spectrum, a whole value chain, from how we collect how the waste, how do we dispose the waste, and what's plastic being used in the process. In Singapore, because of the way that our public housing is structured, or in most of us stay in sort of landed, intense, quite urbanized, and in an apartment, you will find that actually the garbage disposal is something that we in MSE also worry about. Because if we don't do this well, if food remnants are just thrown down the chutes, we will cause a lot of disamenities, particularly to those families that's living lower down on the floor, on the lower floors. So how do we have balanced the need of bagging our garbage versus reducing the wastage of plastic bags? I think that's our dilemma and that's our challenge. So we will very much like to think about solutions that can help us address this problem. And SMS Amy actually has been heading a citizens work group on reducing waste, right? And I think that's a very important consideration. How do we, as a whole, find the right balance of incentive, penalty, rules and regulations that we have to enforce, infrastructure that enable better recycling, better waste collection, and all that towards a lower waste, domestic waste, better recycling, and also maintaining public health and public hygiene. So it's not a single problem that we are trying to solve, but actually is a holistic improvement, uplifting of our environmental standards.
Yeah, maybe I just add on to what Minister say. Well, first of all, as an aside, I think through this dialogue, if you don't remember anything, you must remember that we like the number 3. Because 3R, just now we started with 3 Ps, right? So now we talk about 3 Rs. We also talk about 30 by 30. We also talk about the 3 priority key waste streams. We also talk about our zero waste strategy, right? And then 2030, what are the targets? So the number 3 is very important. Why do I say that? Because just after the 3P, 3R is very important. Reduce, reuse, recycle. So even when we talk about disposables, whether it's single-use plastic bag, which is a disposable, or biodegradable bag, or paper bag, I think our idea, first of all, is to reduce. That is most important, right? Reduce our use of disposables. Doesn't matter what disposable, because all disposables require resources to make, require energy to make, will have carbon emissions, and will have an impact on the environment. Even if it's a biodegradable bag, you still have to make it, right? There is carbon emission, there is use of resources. So as ministers say, when they use biodegradable bag, actually the primary reason is because these countries directly landfill. So if they landfill plastic bag, not biodegradable, then they say we need to have biodegradable bags. In Singapore, as Minister said, incineration. But having said that, the problem is excessive use of disposable. And that's why, as Minister said, we are having a citizens' work group on reducing excessive use of disposable, which is ongoing. The 5th session was last Saturday. There will be more sessions. In fact, Prakash is the chief facilitator. And I'm very happy that I meet him in person today. Because most of it is on Zoom. Yeah. But actually, there will be 1 or 2 more sessions which is open to the public. So I'm inviting, anybody here as well as on Facebook Live. You can watch out for those. And then you can look at some of the recommendations that the work group will be coming up with. They are actually in the process of working out which are the areas they are going to look at, and then come up with recommendations. But our priority really is reducing excessive consumption of all kinds of disposable, not just single-use plastic bag, right? Because if we say we ban single-use plastic bag, you will be using something to hold your, garbage and other things that you buy, right? And you don't want to make it a substitution effect and use or make use of or waste as many other disposables. That's not the idea. The idea is, first of all, I think we are taking too many of these paper bag, plastic bag and so on. How do you actually reduce that first? And then after that, then we talk about reuse, right? Where it's possible, but single use you can't. And then of course recycle. So we also downstream, we are looking at, besides incineration, can you recover some of this single-use plastic bag, even if it's contaminated? Can we recycle it, turn it into feedstock again, like pyrolysis oil, right? But that's not the main solution. The way we want to address it, first of all, is to cut down first, right? And then when you cut down, as Minister said, then what do? You think of how do you make people change their behavior to cut down so many of these single-use disposables, like reusable. So we have a campaign, right? Say yes to waste less. This is to encourage you to use reusable. That means bring your own reusable bag for, shopping, supermarket trips, reusable container and so on. So you will cut down on the use of disposables. Yeah.
I just want to add one point. I understand from my colleagues that from a scientific point of view, actually some of the biodegradable plastics are actually not so easy to recover. So as a result, actually if you put them into the same basket as non-degradable plastics and try to recycle it, actually in some of the process it may affect its efficiency. So the point is, we have to look at it holistically and find the solutions that is, meeting the needs in Singapore.
I just wanted to maybe just add on to what Dr. Amy Koh said about the reduce, right? And I think this idea of reducing, we all understand, but it's constantly being challenged by, what is happening in our society today in terms of the increase in the food delivery and online shopping. And these have actually increased the footprint in terms of the use of plastics. So the question is, how can we, even as an individual, as a community, try and encourage more ground-up initiatives? I think there are some bright sparks, right? We have youth groups, they are championing bring your own bottles. And they are not just putting out messages, they are actually going to hawker centers, they are going to food court and coffee shops to try and encourage the store holders, to encourage their consumers to bring their own bottles, bring their own containers. I think these little measures do add up, and not just, it's all promoting the social norms, the new social norm of our society. So I think one is about how we can put in some of the regulations and measures and policies. The other is also on the ground, how can we encourage? And we're also very encouraged by NTUC, who actually recently introduced charges for use of plastics.
I think Watson's has also recently added on, yeah.
And these are encouraging initiatives on the ground that we will continue to see.
Thank you. So just a quick Koyot Cell, since SMS has already mentioned the Citizen Work Group. Actually, the next session is this coming Saturday, next Saturday on the 5th, and that's the one that's going to be open to the public as well. So if you want to sign up, go into the website. You can actually go into the same website and find the Citizen Work Group on excessive use of disposables. and then you can join us for that one, because this is now going to be the 6th session out of 8 sessions altogether. And the citizens in the work group have already been starting to work out certain solutions, and they want to test it out, or they want to check, do these solutions, what may be some of the issues that they come up. So it'll be very useful to get your feedback as well. So simple coyote selling, and I'm glad to see you face to face as well. Speaking of face to face, maybe I can get one more question from here.
Hello, good morning. I'm Chitra from WWF Singapore. Thank you for mentioning our organization a couple of times and some of the initiatives like the plastic bag charges that we are trying to bring into effect by working with the businesses. A big part of our work is to, like you very rightly mentioned, bringing policymakers, businesses, and the community together to look for solutions that are workable for a sustainable future. So I have 2 questions for you, even though I'm supposed to only ask one. But firstly, you're the only ministry that has sustainability in its name now. So by default, you're almost like the champions for sustainability internally, externally. How do you see the ministry defining the term sustainability beyond what it is right now? Because sustainability definitely is a lot more than what we may understand currently in Singapore. It is all-encompassing, and that would affect everything that happens, whether it's with the policymakers, with the businesses, or even how, for example, schools operate, and how do we prepare future generations for a sustainable economy, for example, or even defining what is a sustainable economy, redefining the economic model, creating new jobs, but at the same time, preparing future generations while transitioning the current generation into that sustainable future. That's one. And number 2, we know that we've spoken quite a bit about the materials and waste management and all of that. And especially with the resource sustainability bill, the extended producer responsibility coming into effect very soon. Yes, I understood what you said about not banning plastic bags, but do you see us reviewing what's happening in Singapore, the infrastructure, and looking at, are there certain materials we need to start not bringing into Singapore, not allowing into Singapore, simply because our infrastructure cannot manage it, whether it is biodegradable, like you mentioned just now, or whether it's something like styrofoam? Do you see this being done at the policy level, or do you expect producers to automatically start looking at this and you hope the market will play out by itself? How do you see that going in? And also when you look at upgrading the infrastructure for recycling, waste management, what are some things that you have in place? For example, our waste sorting system is very much manual at this point. Do we see some future possibilities there? What are some plans for upstream management, things like that?
Thank you very much. You managed to squeeze at least 6 questions in that. Very good. But let's get to the first question, perhaps, if the definition of sustainability, or what we see it as.
I think it's an excellent question, because we have been asking ourselves the same question as well. Obviously, if you look at it, if I may just use the most direct answer, is to look at the UN Sustainability Goals. And it's very, very broad-ranging. It has, for example, eradicating poverty, gender diversity or gender equality, to marine protection, for example. It's very, very wide. It has social element, it has economic element, and obviously it has environmental element as well. And I think that's a very good way to look at the whole sustainability topic, because I think human being wants progress. We want to enjoy better things in life. We are sitting in an air-conditioned room, for example. We are all carrying mobile phones. So that's what we want. So how do we meet that wants, and yet do it sustainably so that we don't overdraw, we don't have an overdraft of the resources from the next generation. I think that's really the challenge for us. But we can't go back to say that, let's go back to living life in a rustic or without phones or without air conditioning. I think if you take a very drastic approach, I think it's not likely to work. It's most workable if we are able to make adjustments along the way. So how do we have that sustainability context being implemented in Singapore? I think it's useful to use three again. As Amy said, we like three things. First is really climate resilience. How do we inoculate ourselves better against climate change? The first is, of course, to mitigate our footprint on the climate. The second is actually to have adaptation. And we are working on both of these. This is so that, we are not inundated by floods because of extreme weather. Our food supply, for example, is not at risk of extreme weather and therefore, sort of global shortages. That is why we are building up our own local capability to produce food. It's really about climate resilience. How do we have the second resilience, which is resource resilience? What if we run out of water? What if we run out of food? What if we run out of substances, paper, pulp, and so on? So we have to look at how to be more resilient, and in that sense, waste less, reduce our usage, recycle more. I think these are what Amy has said, the 3 Rs. So we are thinking about that throughout, the system. That's also important for our economic agencies. They are also thinking about how can we be more resource resilient. So the pandemic has actually taught us that when you have a disruption of your supply chain, actually you need to build up some local capability to manage your supply chain quickly. Just looking at it from a food point of view, actually we find that, hey, we've talked about producing our own food, but actually, where do we get the feedstock? Where do we get the chicks for eggs, for example? That makes us think about how we need to manage the whole supply chain, the whole value chain, and its resilience. And the third one is actually economic resilience. How can we buffer better against a pandemic like this, for example? So saving up during rainy days, having our own reserve so that we can, take some of the savings out in order to help Singaporeans when we have a pandemic like this is some of the important consideration. It's sustainability. It's not just environment, it's also social, it's also economic. How can we bounce back faster? Like Raymond has said, during the circuit breaker, how do we reach out to people? How do businesses continue its business? Even as we, faced with sort of the severe safe distancing measures, circuit breaker. So these are all part of sustainability that is being thought about in the government. Of course, for our ministry, we take a much stronger focus on the environment. And we would like to see ourselves as champion of, government agencies and ministries on this topic, on sustainability, particularly with climate, because I think as far as our carbon footprint, it involves many, many ministries, from transport, on the use of fuel and traffic on the road, aviation, marine, for example, sectors. They are also big consumers of fossil fuels. Our industries, MTI, our energy power generation sector, they have their own carbon footprint. How do we move all these interrelated activity, economic, power generation, transportation, which is part economic, part social, how do we move all these pieces towards a more sustainable future with lower carbon footprint, lower resource, lower wastage, higher efficiency, and yet continue to allow us to, enjoy the standard of living that we aspire to have the jobs that we want, and to give our, family a good life. So that's a discussion that we take place in the ministries, across a few key ministries. We do that all the time. We also have a committee to discuss some of these trade-offs, and that's coordinated by Senior Minister Teo Chee Hean, and involves the few ministries that we talked about, including MND, which has a lot of interest on how we build our environment, how we build our building, how we cool our building, and so on and so forth. I would just like to say that also we would want to drive public service behavior, public service directive, public service procurement. So actually when it comes to school, for example, we have hundreds of schools in Singapore, and if we are able to gradually turn them into zero carbon infrastructure, that's a big step. So we would like to have some schools perhaps to be the champion, volunteer themselves and work towards a zero carbon, and we can use that as a template to then move all the schools towards a zero carbon model. NUS, for example, has recently launched a certified zero carbon building. I think it's the School of Design, for example. And they were telling me that to do that, there are some very interesting ideas. So for example, they cool their rooms not just by air conditioning, but it's air conditioning and fan. So they only use their air conditioning to, I think, 26 or 27 degrees, and then they use the ventilation to give us the comfort of the feel of the skin, so that the demand on the air conditioning system is not as high, and therefore they use less energy. And they think that it's also more healthy, because what they do is that with that system, they are able to not circulate the air, they are able to have flow-through air. In other words, constant flow of air, fresh air into the system. And that actually makes them healthier, the building healthier. So these are all interesting models that we'll like businesses, ourselves, schools, in fact, anyone that has any footprint on this earth to try with us, to pilot with us. And the Eco Fund that we talked about is precisely for that. It doesn't say that it has to be business, it doesn't say that you have to be community group. It's just an idea that you think is going to help us on this sustainability agenda, and you're prepared to try out, if you're prepared to put some time and effort into it, we'll be here to support you.
If I can just add on, Chitra, thank you for the question. Actually, your question covers the entire work of the ministry. And I must say that actually it's not just MSE that covers sustainability efforts. There are many ministries that has many areas and efforts in also promoting sustainability, whether it's in transport, buildings, MTIs, and so on. So that's the first point. So my easy interpretation of sustainability is about how do we consume in this generation in current times without compromising the needs of our future generation, right? So if you look at it this way, actually on almost everything that we do has an impact on the future, whether the cars that we drive, the food that we order, and how we use the plastics and so on and so forth. I would like to highlight one area that may not be so sexy, may not be so exciting, but I think it's very important, particularly if you look at how COVID has affected our everyday lives. And this has to do with public hygiene, right? So public hygiene is an important area that I think, given what is happening now, that we need to also work together to ensure that we start shaping the social norm of our people in our country, whether it's in trade return, disposal of our garbage, and so on and so forth, to ensure that we have a healthy and hygienic and high standards of sanitation. And that's why from the ministry's point of view, from policy point of view, we have recently amended the Act on the Environmental Public Health Act, and that really is a way for us to set the sanitation standards for our country and our community, and also to hold premises managers responsible for the outcomes of the premises. And we are also in support of such efforts, rolling out toilet improvement programs and many of these grants to help our environment continue to sustain. So this is an area that I feel, although we, compares to all those carbon emissions and so on, but it's something actually as a nation we need to also collectively work together.
Yeah, sorry, Prakash, make your work easier a bit. Yeah, I just wanted to add on because I think you have you managed to squeeze in 6 questions under 2 key questions, right? The second one about resources that we bring in, right? About, whether we'll consider if there are some certain materials that will not be desirable, and how do you handle the resources that actually get into, Singapore. Well, first of all, I think that it'd be very difficult to go and select or identify what cannot be brought in, simply because consumption is global and products are manufactured all over the world and they comprise many different types of materials, right? So maybe one example is plastics, right? Single-use plastic, of course, is the most prominent. Everybody can see it, and then we all champion for this. But actually, plastics is everywhere. It's in many, many different materials, right? And therefore, what we have done really is to have the framework. First of all, is the integrated waste management system to ensure that whatever that cannot be recycled will have to be incinerated, right? And we want to incinerate as little as possible, so we need to increase recycling rate. And I said upstream reduction. But having said that, your other question, the sub-question about do you have the facilities to handle these materials, right? So with the Resource Sustainability Act in place, it has been passed, as I've said, we have these 3 priority waste streams where the recycling rate is very low, and that's why we have identified this. So the first one is e-waste, which is going to increase more, right? And therefore, next year, EPR is coming in, as you have said. And with the EPR, where the producers will be responsible for taking back, collection, proper treatment, and disposal, it actually means that we will be able to have the framework to collect, right, all this, waste in that sense, right? But to recycle as much of what is collected, because the producer has a responsibility to do that through the PROs and so on, and then, of course, to dispose of the rest properly. So that will then facilitate the development of a market as well as companies that will set up e-waste recycling facilities to treat and dispose. So in fact, within the next 1 year or so, there'll be 3 more e-waste recycling facilities coming up for the 5 different types of key e-waste that we will have to recycle under EPR. So it will be the same for packaging waste, including plastic, because EPR will come in by 2025. The deposit refund scheme, which is for the beverage containers, will come in earlier by 2022. And again, that will facilitate the development of a market for this, right? Collection and disposal recycling facilities. So we are talking about chemical and mechanical recycling plants, new oil, which is R&D, right, to produce, to recycle and produce this feedstock. And then the last one will be food waste. Same thing. There will be legislation that will facilitate the collection and segregation, actually, and treatment of food waste.
Thank you. I'm cognizant of the time, so we may have I'm going to allow one more question, if I can. So maybe I can get a short question, if you can. Yeah.
Hi, ministers and everybody. Good morning. I'm an undergraduate student from Asian School of Environment at NTU. And I think one overlooked part of the community is actually in army camps. Just now, a lot of ministries were mentioned, but I think MINDEF wasn't one of them. And from personal experience, I think that there's actually quite a lot of food waste in the army camps. And from what I could read online, I think only 10 army camps are recycling the food waste. So maybe can share about what more can be done to reduce the food waste in army camps.
Food waste in army camps. Yeah, I'm guessing it's you.
This has to be me, right? Yeah.
It's either you or me, so, it's you.
Okay. Okay, so I don't have the figures. I cannot confirm what you have said. But I think anecdotally, we do notice sometimes there are, not just the army camp, actually many of our agency community events, there are wastages. So I think that's something that we are mindful about. We have to do even as a community. It's not something that the government or some policies can legislate and so on and so forth. One area is, of course, we reduce, we keep talking about it. And actually, in my last agency, when I was leading PA, we are very mindful about the food wastages in our community events as well. And the first thing we did was to actually reduce the amount of indent. Because when we organize an event, we are worried that there is not enough food for everybody, because you do not like your guests to be running out of food for your guests, right? So that's a case where sometimes when you indent the right number and then the number of people that turn up become very little, and that's where there will be food wastages. In the army camp, it's lesser so, because they have now, with the contract scheme, I believe they have the ability to scale up or down. There are more flexibilities. I think that's in the form of the contract. At the end of the day, it's about how you contract the food catering so that you prevent wastage as possible. But the other aspect about not wasting is how can we food share, right? So that the food that is not being consumed can be shared to people who might need it within our community. It can be packed, it can be delivered to low-income families, it can be delivered to homes, and other groups of people that don't need it, that may not have it. So I also know that in the army camps, when their food are not being consumed, they also usually pass it on to the guard room, right? The guard duty people are always very hungry. They can eat a lot of food. And then finally is how do we then make sure that this food that are not consumed, that cannot be shared, can be actually recycled for other purposes, for example, fertilizers. So we have food digesters for example, in some of the public agencies in our Tampines hub, and these food digesters compose some of this unconsumed food or food into fertilizers. And these fertilizers went back to the gardens to be used for gardening, and that way there's sort of a recycling and circular use of it. So I think these are areas that we can put in place, but I agree with you, bottom line is to make sure that, like what we say in the army, right? Eat what you take what you eat. So don't throw away any food, always indent enough, and then we do our part to make sure that we try to minimize wastages at the individual level.
I should also say that we have plans to require large-scale malls and food establishments, whether you're in food processing or you're in a large central kitchen, to put aside infrastructure to separate food waste in a few years' time. So it's a requirement by law so that we can collect the food waste separately. It allows us to better harness the energy from food waste. It also reduces the contamination on other general waste so that we don't waste energy to try to process and burn the food waste. So when we put the food waste separately and put it into the biogas, it will allow us to harness more energy yield from it. So that's our way of treating food waste. I'm sure we can look at government infrastructure. This is what I meant when we say that we want to look at a framework for all ministries and agencies. MINDEF will be one of them, to look at how we can all, despite the fact that we have different contexts, different requirements, different sizes, different operational needs, to still move towards greater sustainability.
Thank you, Minister. I'm cognizant of the time, so we may not be able to get to any more questions. But I'm hoping that the conversation today has inspired some of you at least to go back to your own spheres of influence, right? Whether it's from your NGOs or schools or other youth organizations, to try and implement some of these ideas that we have already heard. Remember, it starts with you. It starts with all of us. And if we start small, we can do a lot more, and we can influence a lot more. So I'm particularly looking at the young among us. I'm counting myself as part of that as well. By the way, next week I'm going for reservist, so I will make sure my camp has got no food waste. I'm very young enough to go for reservist. But the point is, right, really, it's about us doing our own part, and then influencing our own families, and then our families then go on. And slowly, that's how we change mindset. Mindset change is a long term. So I want to first of all thank the 3 Team MSE members here today, since that's the number for today. Can we join me in thanking them? And a bigger round of applause for all of you as well for coming and asking questions. And for those of you who joined us from home, there were a lot of questions and comments on the Facebook post I unfortunately couldn't get through. I did write down all of them, but it will be captured and maybe it will also help towards MSE's new definition of sustainability, right? You can learn how to do it, how to define that. I'm an English teacher, so if you need any help, please let me know. So on that note, have a pleasant Saturday. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Everybody stay safe. Everybody stay healthy. And goodbye. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.